guys, and welcome to this new mini-series, the Faz-eteria Room. In this episode, we're going to be starting out, and we're going to be talking about all that the Five Nights at Freddy's lore has to offer. So, Alec, you ready?
Oh, my guy, I am ready. Are you ready?
Oh, I'm ready. But before that, I have to give these folks the lowdown on how this is going to go. So, in these mini-series, they're not going to be full podcast episodes. Alec and I are the only ones here. The rest of the guys are on separate mini projects. There's still going to be regular podcast episodes, but this mini-series is just going to be a limited series where we break it into 20-minute segments. Now, before we get started with the first, because we're going to start from the very beginning of the main Five Nights at Freddy's timeline, and we're going to work all the way to the end of the main core games. This isn't going to include the books, and it's not going to include the VR game or the new security breach. All right, so before we get started, just a little disclaimer. This miniseries is being done strictly for the love of the franchise. We will be discussing lore in these videos. This content has no bearing on anything happening outside of the games. We are not acknowledging any actions taken by the developer or the Fnaf community. This is an unbiased series that will not include any exterior events or our opinions on said matters. Now, with that out of the way, let's get started. Alec, you want to start at the very beginning of the timeline?
Oh, sure thing, man. Alrighty. So let's go. For those familiar with the FNAF series, let's go all the way back. Now, for those who might not know, there were two gentlemen named Henry Emily and William Afton, both of which should be very familiar to any FNAF players. So, in the early days, there was a restaurant that first opened up known as Fredbear's Family Diner. Now, forget everything that you've been playing as far as with FNAF 1 and everything. This is the very beginning where two entrepreneurs decided, hey, let's create a restaurant, and we're going to call it Fredbear's Family Diner, a place family. Oh yeah, a place of friendly family fun where nothing's going to go bad, right? I mean,
definitely nothing bad happens here ever.
Yeah, no janky animatronics coming to do questionable. Anyways, yeah, okay. So here we are, two entrepreneurs starting off their newfound franchise. And everything's going well. The only thing is, the man William Afton, well, he's crazy. He's absolutely nuts. And as FNAF players might know, he is Purple Guy. Anyways, so Henry Emily has a daughter, Charlie Emily. And one night, a incident occurred where there was a birthday party happening at Fredbear's Family Diner, and Charlie was left outside. Doors were locked, and really great parenting job, Henry, leaving your child out while the Fredbear inside was giving cake to all the children. I forget what minigame was that, Daniel?
That's the security puppet minigame from Pizzeria Simulator.
Yes. So, as you can see on screen right now, that is probably the very first significant minigame that we're talking about that happened at Fredbear's Family Diner. At this minigame, we are at Fredbear's Family Diner. And as you can see, Charlie is banging on the window, trying to get the attention of the others and wants to be let in. Now, a thing to note is the security puppet was designed to look after Charlie.
Yes, specifically Charlie. If we look at the minigame, the wristband that is on Charlie is unique to her. None of the other kids have it, so it's safe to assume that Henry had designed the security puppet exclusively to watch her.
Agreed. Yeah, that's actually a very important point to note. And as you can see, as the minigame goes on, the kids, I believe they eventually stop or put something. Yeah, they put something on top of the prize box that stops the security puppet from going out and looking after Charlie. What happens on the outside is Charlie dies to William Afton, thus claiming William Afton's first victim as Charlie Emily, Henry Emily's daughter. Pretty much what happens afterwards is her father, disappears for a while, nowhere to be seen, and the franchise kind of dissipates after that. After having a horrendous, child murder incident, the dynamic duo of Henry Emily and William Afton kind of part ways, and the whole Fredbear Family Diner shuts down. Do you want to take it away now, my guy?
Yeah. So first, I'd like to mention that because Alec and I had to work hard to really put together the timeline, and I think, in my opinion, the hardest thing to pinpoint was who the first death was. So we obviously came to the conclusion that it was Charlie. Originally, I debated whether it was William Afton's daughter, because there are things that happened that would make sense when you look at the story rather than just the cold hard facts. But we ended up going with Charlie because there are some discrepancies later that wouldn't work if it was William's daughter as opposed to Charlie's daughter, or Henry's daughter, Charlie. So once we have Charlie dying, we're saying that, and first of all, we're not sure of the motive behind the murder. It was likely that William, who's unhinged, always has been likely, probably had some kind of bad tendencies as a child that worked their way into his adulthood. He might have had some sort of grudge against Henry, perhaps a dispute in their working relationship. It could have been a revenge kill on Charlie. We don't know. But we're saying next off is that the crying child, who is William's son, sees what happens to Charlie. Now, Charlie died in the late 70s, early 80s. If we're just ballparking that, crying child would have been fairly young when he saw this. And this is why he's constantly afraid, and he's constantly saying things like, it'll happen, or he's constantly looking at the back room and fearing for his life when he sees employees wearing the suits, because he saw what happened to Charlie at one of the pizzerias, the first pizzeria, Fredbear's, and now he's fearful to go back. Now, if we skip ahead a little bit, Crying Child is chomped in 1983. This is the minigame that we see in Five Nights at Freddy's 4. When he's picked up by his brother and his brother's friends, he's brought up to Fredbear's mouth, and the lifeless animatronic, this is not a possessed animatronic, by the way, bites down and kills him. This is very significant because the Crying Child becomes a very big character later on and might possibly inhabit Golden Freddy. This is disputed, but very likely.
Thus becomes the infamous bite of 83, right?
Yes, exactly. Bite of 83 and Bite of 87 were kind of at odds for a while in the FNAF community, but 83 is when the Crying Child gets bit. This is the major catalyst for most of the series. Also around this time, and interestingly, Fredbear and Golden Bonnie, who are the two mascots of the Fredbear Family Diner, it's branching out. We see in 1983, there's also a TV show which stars Freddy Fazbear as well. You see Bonnie and Chica and Foxy. All of these characters are gaining popularity, and eventually this will set up when they branch away from Fredbear's into Freddy Fazbear's Entertainment.
It's kind of like after the closing of Fredbear's Family Diner, I guess some next level entrepreneurs came by and said, "Hey, let's make this, let's revive the company and make it into a franchise." So I guess we could assume that, when Fredbear's closed, they were kind of multiple locations of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza that started opening up, right?
Yeah.
This is where I think FNAF 4 is kind of like the beginning. Like, we talked about Fredbear's Family Diner being the first incident and kind of like whole, I guess, spark of a storyline, but we don't actually see it besides in the FNAF 4 minigames. But the actual, gameplay of FNAF 4 is kind of like where things begin. right? With the whole playing as crying child and, you know, going through his traumas and all that stuff.
Yeah, and we're not exactly sure when he dies, but we're aware that he dies at a certain point after being bit. It wasn't the moment he was bit. He struggled for a little bit before eventually dying, and we assume that the gameplay that Alex talking about at night is him in a comatose state. So for days or weeks, maybe he was in this.
Two things to note. The loading screen, if you look really closely, there is, I think, an IV next to the bed on one screen, and then another one, I think it's like a flower pot to kind of like
There's
give.
also a pill bottle as well.
Yes, the pill bottle, and that's supposed to signify. This is all in his head, and kind of the IV kind of dictates that he's in a hospital bed. You know, because I mean, why else would a kind of image of an IVB next to this child's bed? You know what I'm saying? It's like kind of weird, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I think that confused a lot of theorists because, you know, when you see him in his bedroom running around, and the nightmare animatronics, mind you, are not real. They're strictly nightmares conjured by his mind. It was a bit confusing at first to people, I think, until they realized that this was likely all happening after the minigame in Fnaf 4.
Yeah, that 100%. I think that's where, like you said, it was just because it's just so ambiguous. You know what I mean? It's like nobody really knows. You know, hell, with all of these games, it's very, you really have to kind of really dig through the silver linings between all these games, or else it's like, you know, you'd get lost. And I mean, you and I creating this timeline, we like you said earlier, oh my gosh, we had to go through this stuff, man. Like it was, yeah. But you know what? If you guys stick with us for the next few episodes, I think you'll see that, you know, me and Daniel are onto something here. Like I think we've got a pretty solid timeline. But yeah,
I think we've worked it out pretty well. The only other thing I'd like to note significantly in the era of Fredbear's, so we've been through Charlie's death, leading to Crying Child's death. I think the other significant thing to note here is that there were, in addition to the TV show, which inspired a lot of the Freddy's characters, there was also a toy line of characters. So they had Bonnie, Chica, and Freddy, as well as presumably an early Foxy, which was very similar to what Mangle looks like before he's broken, he or she. They were out, and they would eventually inspire the toy animatronics, but that would take a while. So just keep in mind that in addition to the plush toys and the TV show, there were also a smaller toy line that would be taken into account for future Fazbear locations.
Yeah, and also just to add on to our viewers, it's at this point, like, you know, it's the very early beginnings of, you know, the FNAF timeline that I think confuses a lot of people, and I think what you have to understand is that there is a lot happening and slight overlaps happening in this time. So, as we said, in the early 70s and 80s when Charlie died, that's one thing. But at the time of Crying Child and nearing his death, there were the FNAF franchise, the Five Nights at oh my gosh, the Freddy Fazbear Pizza locations opening up. Gosh, at the same time, and like Daniel said, the TV show airing in 1983 with the Fredbear and Friends, and yeah. So just to sum up, keep in mind that the timeline kind of overlaps at this point, but it will come back into one clean timeline. It's just stay with us for a little bit, you know? So yeah. So yeah, Daniel, did you want to talk about the whole incident with? So now that Crying Child is in a coma and he's nearing death, something happens that William Afton finds out about Charlie.
Yes. So it is a bit ambiguous when this happens because these three events are all pretty close. But at a certain point, either before Crying Child dies or after, William discovers that Charlie's soul has inhabited the security puppet, which we see was trying to save her in the security puppet minigame from Pizzeria Simulator. And this is very significant because not only does this tell him that life after death is possible, but that he can feasibly, given time, trial, and error, learn to harness this power. He's not sure of the mechanic quite yet, but when he sees that the puppet is alive and that Charlie is somehow able to maneuver around the pizzeria as this new creature, he decides that he's going to find out how to give life himself.
Yeah. Yeah, and which I think the FNAF community labels this as remnant.
Yeah, so I think to wrap this one up, Alec, you want to talk about the main 5 deaths of the series. These are what started it all in FNAF 1, but canonically, it's sort of mid-early in the timeline.
Yeah, this is where things are going to start making a lot more sense. This is the big significant what makes FNAF the FNAF story. So after William Afton discovers that Charlie is living on in the puppet, William decides, like as Daniel said, he can harness this power. And so what he does is what the whole shebang of FNAF is about. William, in 1985, as our next significant date, begins the first 5 missing children's incident. And how he does this is that he gets access to the golden Bonnie suit that we know from Fredbear's Family Diner to lure kids into the back room of a Freddy Fazbear's location and first 5 child murders, of which go on to, we'll get to this later, but eventually haunt the main animatronics of Freddy, Chica, Bonnie, and Foxy. Yeah, that guy, yeah.
The core 4.
I'm like, there's one. I'm like, how? They're like the Beatles. How could you forget one of the Beatles? I mean, like.
Well, Ringo Starr. I don't know.
Yeah. Maybe. Sorry, Foxy, you're Ringo. I'm sorry. But yeah, that is the next big timeline. So we've got 1983 and 1985 as 2 big dates so far.
1985 is pretty interesting because you can just dismiss it as a date where a lot of this stuff happened and the children were nameless for a while. But honestly, in the next episode, we're going to give a little bit more insight into possibly the individual children that were taken and even maybe how some of them were taken, because it's something that has been a little bit looked over, I think, in a lot of timelines. So stick with us till next time, Lunchmates, and me and Daniel will be right back to continue the 5 Nights at Freddy's timeline. See you guys around.